ER. The obvious way to get there was by ambulance, but not necessarily anymore. Aisha Tyler explains how with the explosion of ride-hailing apps, people are just tapping and clicking their way to the hospital.
Brian Charlot is both an Uber and Lyft driver and has been shuttling people in and around both the Charleston and Columbia area for more than a year and a half. During his time as a driver, he has also ended up dropping passengers off at the ER. One case in particular he vividly remembers.
She walks up to the car and I noticed that she was bleeding, and I got a little concerned.
The woman had slipped, fallen, and hit her head on the ground, putting a large gash across her face. Brian took her to the nearest hospital.
It seemed like she was okay aside from a flesh wound.
In this case, and in cases where the situation is not a major trauma, MUSC emergency physician and emergency department director Dr. Gregory Hall says calling an Uber is an easy option.
If I injured myself, and I needed to get to the hospital, and I don't think it's serious enough to call an ambulance and have a trained paramedic take me, that, I could get an Uber and I could get down to the hospital fairly quickly.
Dr. Hall says the trend of using ride sharing to go to the emergency room instead of an ambulance seems to be catching on.
There was a study last fall that showed since Uber has sort of come about, there's been a 7, maybe 8%, I believe, drop in ambulance 911 calls.
That study, authored by an economics professor at the University of Kansas and a doctor with Scripps Mercy Hospital in San Diego, compared ambulance usage rates in 766 cities across the country before and after Uber was introduced. The study revealed the number one reason for people taking Uber instead of an ambulance to the ER simply boils down to cost, something Trident Health System's EMS coordinator Chris Esdorn understands.
It can be very expensive from time to time versus I think I've seen it as low as $5 or $7 to get a ride somewhere. Versus some of the other ambulance bills where I've seen in excess of $500, $600, $700.
On the other hand, Dr. Hall does caution you get what you pay for, and oftentimes an Uber driver is not going to be trained to deal with a major emergency.
A trained paramedic, they can do life-saving therapies before you get to the hospital. They can also inform us prior to getting to the hospital that they're on their way.
Brian says another upside to ride sharing to the hospital is that the apps are easy to use and drivers can quickly and accurately locate a person.
It's GPS tracked. I come to you, you know when I'm there, you come to the car and we go to the hospital.
Both medical professionals I spoke to say another plus to ride sharing in minor emergency situations is that it frees up emergency personnel for someone who needs it the most. Like someone who might be having a heart attack, stroke, asthma attack, an accident victim, or any other major medical situation.
When you have 30 calls at one time for non-emergent reasons and only one out of those 30 calls is a true emergency, we could have had the other 29 ambulances available for the true emergencies.
There's a lot more Uber drivers and Lyft drivers than there are paramedics and ambulances.
And it's that efficiency that Dr. Hall says could make the difference in an emergency. Aisha Tyler, Live 5 News.
We also reached out to Roper Healthcare for a response. Their spokesperson says Roper has also seen a rise in patients using those ride-hailing services to their emergency room and express care facilities. He says that using Uber or Lyft for non-emergent needs frees up local emergency service for those urgent calls. He adds that anyone experiencing medical emergency is encouraged to dial 911 so they can get help just as soon as they can.
Now, your first